I was born in Insterburg, East Prussia, Germany on May 11th, 1933, to Margareta and Erwin Cohen. The day after I was born, the Nazis began burning books. My parents divorced before my first birthday, and my mother married Eric Jacobsen. We moved to Bamberg, where he lived and worked, and we became a family there. Erwin Cohen, his mother and sister, immigrated to Palestine in 1935, where he joined the Haganah and took part in anti-British terrorist activities. Facing imminent arrest, he escaped but made the fatal mistake of returning to Germany. He eventually was rounded up, sent to Auschwitz, and murdered there in 1943. On the evening of November 9, 1938, we were just sitting down to the first course of soup. A family friend burst into the house yelling, "The synagogue's on fire! The synagogue is burning!" Dad jumped up from the table, grabbed a couple of jackets, and we ran out the door and down the 2 blocks to the synagogue. We hid in the shadows of a house diagonally across the street from the synagogue. Brown shirts were running up and down the sidewalk next to the synagogue. They were yelling and throwing objects through the stained glass windows, and I saw flames shooting out into the dark night. The next morning, my dad was arrested by 2 uniformed men. They gave him 10 minutes to pack and took him to the train station. His journey ended in Dachau concentration camp along with the rest of Bamberg's Jewish men. To get me out of her hair, Mother sent me back to Insterburg to be with her parents. Because my dad was a severe diabetic, my mother went to Gestapo headquarters to see how she could get him released. She was told that if she wanted to see him again, she would have to show proof that she made arrangements for our family to leave Germany. This meant she had to get visas or landing permits to a country that was willing to take us and to book passage to that country. Only Shanghai, China, and Havana, Cuba opened their doors to Jewish immigration in 1938. My parents had applied for U.S. visas right after the Nuremberg laws were passed in September 1935, and they would be eligible for American visas when their quota numbers came up. My mother thought it made sense to book passage to Cuba, only 90 miles from the U.S., rather than to be halfway around the world in Shanghai, China, when our family would be granted entry. She went to the Cuban embassy, but was told that all the visas were already issued for that year. They were, however, issuing Cuban landing permits. She paid $500 for landing permits for our family. She booked passage on the MS St. Louis. Each Jew had to pay for a passage and a half because Hitler said, "Who's going to pay the cost of the ship returning empty to Germany?" The authorities were satisfied and they released Eric near the end of March 1939. We had 90 days to leave Germany and never return. The ship departed Hamburg, Germany, May 13, 1939. We had a wonderful 14-day cruise to Havana. Upon our arrival, Captain Gustav Schroeder was told not to dock the ship at the usual wharf, but to lay anchor in the bay so the immigration authorities could come aboard and check everyone's credentials. The 28 passengers with Cuban visas and 1 Hungarian tourist were allowed to disembark. 907 people remained on board. Captain Schroeder selected a passenger committee to address the dire problem. The committee telegraphed the U.S., Canada, Mexico, and other countries asking for asylum for the remaining 907 refugees. None responded. President Roosevelt and his wife were telegraphed twice with no response. This lack of concern proved the Nazis' point. The world didn't give a damn what happened to these Jews, or the rest of Europe's Jews. Hitler ordered the ship to return to Germany. This meant certain reincarceration for many of the men on board. Frantic efforts were underway by Marvin Tropper of Hayes to persuade Western European nations to offer asylum. Queen Wilhelmina of Holland agreed to take the 181 refugees with infants. My brother was only 13 months old, so we qualified to go to Holland. Belgium, France, and finally England agreed. None of the refugees were returned to Germany. Of the 907 refugees, 254 were rounded up by the Nazis over the course of the war and murdered. We were placed in an internment camp, Heiplat, outside of Rotterdam. Our number for an American visa came up on December 7, 1939. Each adult was only allowed to take 10 mark, approximately $4.30, out of Germany. Eric's second cousin, our sponsor, sent funds, and we were able to buy passage on the Fandom 2. We left Holland January 23, 1940, and arrived in Hoboken, New Jersey on February 5th. I'll never forget the moment we arrived. It was a damp, chilly evening. I was sitting on a suitcase on the dock with my family. An old friend of my parents came up to me, handed me an American flag, and said, "Welcome to America."